Hi, in this video we want to introduce the concepts of decision analysis, which are provided in Chapter 9 of our textbook. So up to now in chapters 1 through 8, we've focused mainly on what we call deterministic modeling. And what we mean by that is, for the most part, when we were formulating problems and asking Solver to decide the best course of decisions, it was all with information that was known with pretty good certainty. In other words, there were no uncertain elements. There were no things left to chance or probability. So as we transition from what we call that deterministic decision optimization into now this world of uncertain decision optimization. And again, in a working environment, you face plenty of situations of uncertainty. The book provides some examples where you're introducing a new product and you're not sure about things in terms of, say, the level of demand from customers, how much it may cost to produce. Are there things that you can do to try to mitigate the uncertainty by test marketing or building prototypes and things like that? And another example they give is, say, with a financial firm. So if you're looking at which market sectors and individual securities may offer the best prospects. And again, of course, anytime you enter in the world of investing, you're entering into a world of uncertainty. And that can be from the stock market, the general economy, what's going to happen with interest rates, etc. Other examples provided would be, say, if you're bidding on something and you're not sure about what the cost will be or what the other bidders may be doing in terms of their actions, and even what the range of bids might be. Another example is an agricultural firm selecting mix of crops and livestock. You've got, again, a situation where you're subject to the states of nature of weather, commodity prices. And then the one more example is, say, an oil company that's trying to decide whether to drill for oil. Oil, of course, is known for being incredibly uncertain because you can get information up to a point in terms of the prospects of oil being in a location, but at the end of the day you have to make some pretty big bets in terms of drilling and finding out truly whether or not there's oil found or if indeed it's a dry hole. So these are just examples of, again, business decisions that have to be made, but they're being made in the environment of uncertainty. Now, the chapter gives an example of an oil situation, and so this individual owns this company called Go for Broke, and he owns or has rights to oil wells in an unproven territory. A preliminary geologist report has offered that there's about a 25% chance, or 1 in 4, of oil actually being on the particular tract of land. To actually drill into this land and find out truly whether or not there's oil or not would cost about $100,000, which for this operation, that's a lot of money, and it would put them pretty much almost out of business if it turned out to be a dry well. On the other hand, if he does hit oil on this well, then the estimated value of the land or the oil extracted from it comes out to about $800,000. And he has an option to actually sell it before he drills on the land. In other words, before incurring the $100,000 investment, he could sell it to some other company who is offered to pay $90,000 for his current property or the rights to it. So a fundamental question, of course, is, he's got this situation and it's fraught with uncertainty. Only a 25% chance of it actually paying off if he were to drill. And so the most fundamental question is, should he, spend the $100,000 to drill, or should he just sell the tract right now and not get into that level of risk? Now, from what we extracted from the problem, we know that on the left side we have these alternatives. So right now his most obvious alternatives are to drill for oil or to sell the land. And we're kind of saying that's his entire state of possible alternatives. The columns here represent the status of the uncertain elements of the problem. So for example, if he chooses to drill for oil, and he finds out that indeed there is oil on the land, his net cash flow on this is $700,000. And that's simply the $800,000 he receives in the oil revenue minus the $100,000 he had to spend to drill on it. Correspondingly, though, if he drills on the land and finds that it's dry, there's no oil, then the net cash flow is that minus $100,000. Now, if he chooses the option of sell the land, then it really doesn't matter whether or not the land has oil or if it's dry or not. He still only gets $90,000. But again, it's a positive $90,000. And at the bottom, it lists the chances as were reported in the case. So let's sort of back up a little bit and put this into the general context of decision analysis. So the decision maker is the individual or group responsible for making the decision. In other words, that's whoever is the entity that is ultimately responsible for making such a decision. Now, alternatives are the options that decision maker can make. These are things within his or her control. In other words, the decision maker gets to choose the alternative. Now, that's very different than the next bullet, which is the outcome. And the outcome is affected by random factors outside the control of the decision maker. Now, these determine the situation that will be found when the decision is executed. So the decision maker does not get to control the ultimate outcome. The decision maker can choose an alternative, but then what happens in an uncertain situation is not within the control. Now, these possible situations are referred to as states of nature. In other words, it's leaving it to nature, it's leaving it to chance in terms of which of a given set of outcomes may in fact occur. Now, this notion of prior probabilities is basically that as the problem is described, we have information about costs and potential payoffs and things like that. But we're also given information about the likelihoods or the probabilities of these various states of nature occurring. And again, these are what are referred to as prior probabilities. And the reason we call them prior probabilities is it's what we know right now, sort of before we're being asked to make the decision. Now, it turns out later on, we may be able to adjust those probabilities by certain kinds of interventions. And that's why these are called prior probabilities, because they're sort of the starting set of probabilities that we have. Now, each combination of a decision alternative and a state of nature results in some outcome. In other words, sort of every cell in that table that we just saw is a combination of each potential payoff is a combination of an alternative chosen and the resulting state of nature that occurs. And so the payoff refers to that quantitative measure of the value to the decision maker if in fact that outcome is realized. And again, for the most part in the business world, that's a monetary value. Now, as we're kind of covering the fundamentals of decision analysis and getting some terminology and so forth, and we'll show some calculations here in a second, but we will sort of round this out later on in terms of a lot of the behavioral aspects of decision making. But let's first of all sort of understand the technical aspects. So again, kind of mapping back to our terminology. So our possible states of nature for this problem are that, again, the tract of land contains oil or it does not contain oil. It's dry. And the probabilities that we're starting with are that it's a 25% chance of having oil and a 75% chance of having no oil. And by the way, of course, we have to follow the laws of probability, which means the sum of those probabilities for our possible states of nature must sum to 1. So you couldn't say, well, the tract of land has a 15% chance of having oil and a 50% chance of having no oil. Well, 15 and 50 adds up to a 65% chance, and my question back to you would be, well, where's the other 35%? There must be some other state of nature if it either contains oil or not contains oil. I don't know what that is. But again, actually, we have to always sum to 1 in terms of our probabilities that are characterizing some space. And here's the payoff table. So again, we're just mapping it to the terminology that we had earlier. So you've seen these numbers, you understand where they came from, and this is just what we would now call the payoff table for this particular very simple problem. Now, there's several sort of very low-tech methods for making a decision in a situation like this. And the classic ones described are the first one is called the Maximax criteria. And again, the key thing to know is that this is the decision criterion for the eternal optimist. In other words, if someone always thinks the best possible outcome is going to occur, then they're going to choose the alternative that has the greatest upside because they're so confident and optimistic that the best possible outcome is going to happen. Now, the reason it's called the Maximax is because you're going to choose the alternative that has the maximum payoff from all of the alternatives. So all this means is, and we look here down at the bottom, all it means is we go to each alternative, like the first one is drill for oil, and we look across the row there from all the possible states of nature, and we go, well, the best, if we choose drill for oil, then what's going to happen is the best outcome of all the possible states of nature. And that means we're comparing 700 and minus 100. Well, the optimist thinks, man, if I drill for oil, then I'm definitely going to find oil. So he would value that alternative of drilling for oil at $700, which is the maximum across that row. We do the same thing on the second one, sell the land. Well, the maximum of all the payoffs on that row is 90. So now you've got the two maximums over here on the right, and the optimist will choose the maximum of those maximums. So the optimist would choose to drill for oil here. In other words, he's confident he's going to get the best outcome, whichever alternative he or she chooses, and in this case, it's drilling for oil. So the problem with sort of this very simple approach is that it gives no concern to the likelihoods of these various states of nature. Like suppose there was a 1 in a million chance of oil actually being found on the land. Well, in the mind of the optimist, that really doesn't matter, the probabilities. They're not even entering into his or her thinking. It's kind of like, in Dumb and Dumber, when he said, so you're saying there's a chance. The optimist just eternally looks and chooses the alternative in that respect. The next criterion is one that's called the Maximin criterion. This is kind of the other way, and this is the best criterion for someone who's a total pessimist, someone who thinks they're like, whatever alternative they choose, then the state of nature is going to be the worst for that particular alternative. So this just kind of goes the other way. You look at each row in this case, and you identify what's the worst case outcome of all the states of nature for that particular alternative. So when the pessimist looks at drill for oil, they go, man, if we drill for oil, I know for sure it's going to come up dry. So he or she would value that alternative as having that minus $100,000 realization. They would look at the sell for land, and they would choose the minimum of that, and it turns out the minimum is the same as the maximum for that row, which is 90. And so then this pessimist says, well, I'm either going to get minus 100,000 if I drill for oil, or I'm going to get $90,000 if I sell the land. So I'm going to go with the maximum of those minimums, which is to choose to sell the land and cash in my $90,000. So again, this criterion also does not concern the probabilities of the states of nature. So again, imagine there was a 99.9% chance of there being oil on the property, then they're still going to choose to sell it, even though it's almost a full slam dunk that in fact they would have the big, $700,000 or $800,000 payoff. So again, it's a very limited, kind of super simple criterion. The third one they present is what's called the maximum likelihood. And this basically just says the following. What you do is, in the first step, you look at the possible states of nature and you identify the one that is most likely to happen. So in this case, it's the fact that very likely the well is going to come up dry. So first of all, you choose the state of nature that's most likely. Then you simply choose the alternative that provides the maximum payoff given that particular most likely state of nature. So again, step one is just say, all right, we're only going to now focus on the state of nature which is dry, and then when you look at that, it's a very simple decision. You go, well, I'm either going to get a minus 100 if I drill, or I'm going to get 90 if I sell. It's an easy decision, and that's step two. You're going to now choose the option to sell the land, which is going to maximize that most likely, the payoffs from the most likely outcome. Again, this has its issues, and that it's not if it was a 51% chance of it being dry and a 49% chance of it being with oil, that's the outcome of this is going to be the same, whether it's 51%, 75%, or 99% as far as is the state of nature that has the highest probability. So again, it's kind of incomplete in that respect. Now, the one that we'll be actually using mostly in this chapter is what's called Bayes' decision rule. And Bayes uses basically all of the information that we've seen so far, and it definitely uses those prior probabilities in a sort of complete fashion. And all it's really doing is calculating a weighted average which is computed by the payoff times the probability and then summing those all together. It's calculating an expected payoff for each alternative, and then you choose the alternative that has the largest expected payoff. And here's a shot from the from the Go for Broke example here. And let me just shell out here to Excel, and I will just show you that calculation. So here we've got our payoff table over here on the left, and the prior probabilities given below that. And again, as you can see, they're in this light blue color, which says this is data that is given, in fact, for the problem. Now, we've named the cells, we've named the ranges, they're over here on the right side. And these expected payoffs are very simply, it's a sum product calculation. So the expected payoff for drilling, for the option of drilling, is the payoffs, which in this case is, either the 700 or the minus 100, times, in the sum product function, times the probabilities of those two occurring. So it's basically 0.25 times 700 plus 0.75 times minus 100. So, and that will give you a resulting expected payoff of $100. Again, if we just kind of piece that out, we would say 0.25 times 700 is 175, and if we do the same thing for the dry, then it's 0.75 times a minus 100, which gives us a total of minus 75. And if we add those two together, then in fact, that's how we're getting our $100. So that's what's going on in the sum product, is it's just simply the probability times the payoff plus the probability times the payoff. So it's a very simple calculation, and it represents sort of if you sort of played this game a large number of times, it would be what at the end of the day, your average payoff per play for this sort of game, if you think about it that way. Now, so again, Bayes calculating these expected values. What's nice about it is it accounts for all states of nature and their associated probabilities. And like I said, it sort of represents the average payoff if you played it a lot of times. So, you can say, oh, on average, Bayes would pay off, the Bayes calculation would pay off this. Now, we'll see later why that's a little dangerous if you're someone like, this guy in the chapter who's, he just really gets one shot at drilling for oil or not. So, he doesn't, not unlike a huge oil company, he doesn't get to play these games a huge number of times. It's just kind of one roll of the dice. And so the criticisms, though, are, first of all, it relies on someone being able to estimate prior probabilities. And, we know from research that there's considerable uncertainty on that. So, if an expert says, yes, I believe it's a 0.25 chance of there being oil on this land, well, their ability to precisely estimate that probability is not very good. So you have to understand there may even be uncertainty about the precision of the probabilities that have been articulated. And again, these are largely subjective. It's not like studying the physics of a coin and realizing that the coin has a 50-50 chance of landing on heads or tails. This geologist has looked at a bunch of reports and read some seismic graphs and things like that. So there's he's thought about how much oil is in the general area. So it's more sort of like a spooky science, and there's some subjectivity in nature. So that's another thing is don't hang too much of your decision making on probability estimates. And again, the final one at the bottom is the fact that it ignores typical aversion to risk. So in general, humans don't like to sort of bet it all on one flip of the coin, or one roll of the dice, or one drilling of a potential oil-bearing well on land. So it's kind of just calculating that expectation without really bringing into the picture how that particular individual may feel about risk. And we also know that humans differ very much from one to the other in terms of their feelings about risk, and we'll talk more about that once we get through the technical aspects. Now, the chapter also presents this notion of a decision tree, which, by the way, decision trees are just really helpful for helping you clarify your thinking, communicating a decision situation to others, and it's a basis for evaluating a decision. And it's especially good later on when we start looking at more complicated decisions that have various stages of decision. It's like where you might have to make a decision now, but then depending on some random events, you may have to make a decision later on, and then a decision after that. So it's for what we call multi-stage decision situations, which you do face in your personal life, and also, you will in your professional life. It's just a really handy tool to have in your quiver. So the decision tree, it's very simple. It just has two types of what we call nodes. We indicate a little square to represent a decision node. And again, this is a little decision node has branches coming out of it, and the decision maker gets to choose which branch they want to travel on as they come out of a decision node. An event node is represented by a little circle, and that indicates a random event. Well, the decision maker does not get to choose which branch they emerge from an event node. That's left to chance. We'll characterize it with the probabilities of which branch we may be coming out of, but nevertheless, the decision maker gets to choose the decision, how they emerge from a decision node, but it's subject to chance in terms of how they leave an event node. So here's a decision tree for the gopher broke problem. As you can see on the left side, here's the ultimate decision, and it's a square node. It's labeled A here, and that is, do we drill or do we sell? That's what's facing Max here in the problem. He's like, do we drill or do we sell? And then if you drill, though, then you're going to be subject to an event node, which is labeled B. And that event node is, well, once you drill, you're going to find out either there's oil there or indeed it's a dry well. And you'll notice that at the far right are the important payoffs of this problem. If we decide to drill and there's oil there, then great, we get $700,000. If not, then we have the minus $100,000. And of course, if we choose to sell, we get that safe $90,000. We've also got the probabilities labeled onto the tree as well. So again, this is just sort of a very simple tree. And what I want to show you now is how it can be modeled in Excel. And what I'm going to use is I'm going to use an Excel add-in called Tree Plan, which is very much like the decision tree add-in from the Risk Solver platform. They work very much the same, and they're very easy to do. So let me just sort of model this up in the Tree Plan add-in. So what I'm going to do is come over here to just a blank sheet in Excel. So I've got Excel here. So I'm doing my regular thing, and I choose add-ins. And so you would have to have added this add-in in before you start this. And so I've already done that. We'll show you how to do that in class. But I choose the add-in ribbon, and over here is this one called Decision Tree. Well, when I click that, then it's going to immediately pop a starting decision tree that will have just 2 possible decisions. So it pops this window. I'm going to say New Tree, and there we should have it. So Excel's running a bit slow here. So what it does is it, and let me just close this up, shorten this up a little bit. Okay. Or we'll just bring this regular one back. So this is, Tree Plan Academic, very simple add-in, and so I'm going to basically take you through the construction of a tree using Tree Plan. Again, it's very similar for what you have in Risk Solver. So you construct the tree as follows. So here we are standing here, and we've got the decision to either drill for the oil. So I'm going to label this one drill if we choose this alternative out of the decision node, or we're going to sell the property. And you can call it whatever you want in there. I'm just choosing the same labels that were given in the example problem. And you imagine this is that if you indeed head down this path, meaning if you choose to drill, then we view this as sort of like paying a toll, and I'm going to put in minus 100. In other words, this is going to be the cash outlay we're going to have to conduct if in fact we decide to drill. So I'm going to put a minus 100 in this box that's directly below the label drill. Similarly, if I decide to sell the land, then I'm going to get a positive amount, so I'm going to put in a positive $90,000 right here. Now, when I put in those values, by the way, it automatically sort of puts them where they need to be for consideration within the model. So, for example, what this has done is I put the $90,000 label right here, and what it did is it automatically sort of updated the values at the end of the tree. So it's kind of like we are always going to push all the money values back to the end of the tree, to what we call the terminal nodes of the tree, sort of the far right nodes of the tree. Now, it also did one more thing, and that is that it chose this 90 and put it up here at sort of our starting decision. And I'm going to make one change here. It will be down here, and I'm going to get rid of that black box that was in front of it, and I'm going to just put a little border around this. So what the tree plan is automatically doing is, with the information that I've just put in right now, it's now automatically going to tell me what's the best course of action. So as the tree stands right now in its sort of partially completed space right here, it's basically saying, if I've got a decision node to choose between drill and sell, and my payoff for drilling is a minus 100,000, and my payoff for selling is a positive 90,000, then this 2 right here, now in the decision node, says choose the second branch. That's the smartest one. And if you choose 2, the best branch here, then you're going to get a resulting expected payoff of the $90,000 that is right here. So like, for example, if the payoff was only $50,000, you'll see it still is a very smart thing to do, to choose the second branch here. And so it's saying choose the second branch, and if you do that, you'll get a $50,000 payoff. Well, suppose, it was a minus $50,000. Well, that's still better than a minus $100,000. But watch what happens if we go to, say, a minus $125,000. Then you'll notice now the best decision has changed. So in this decision node right here, it says, ooh, now you should choose the first branch. Choose option number 1, which is to drill, because that's only a $100,000 loss. If you choose branch 2, you're going to have a $125,000 loss. So you now see that it changed from 2 to 1, and also this value here is saying if you choose branch 1, this is what your expected payoff is. So let me go back and set it back to our original data. So we've just constructed up to now. I'm just giving you a sense for how TreePlan or the risk solver decision tree model, it automatically sort of updates what are the best decisions for the nodes where you actually have a choice to make. So this problem, though, is incomplete because we know that there's this uncertain event that has maybe a good payoff. If all we're going to do is drill and not have any chance of any payoff, this would be a really sort of simple, stupid problem. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to select this terminal cell, which is at the end of the drill branch, and then we're going to hit our decision tree add-in button again. And this time we get a different little window that pops up. Instead of saying, do you want to create a new tree, it says, all right, what do you want to do? And do you want to make this a decision node? Do you want to make it an event node? Or do you want to remove the branch altogether? Well, what we want to do is we want to select change to event node, and we want to specify how many branches we want to come out of this event node. Well, there's only 2 branches. It's either we're going to find oil or we're going to find it's dry. So I'm going to change it to an event node, and I'm going to tell it I want 2 branches to come out of that. And when I hit that, indeed, it will in fact now spawn this event node with 2 branches coming out of it. Well, this top event node is basically that we find oil, so we'll say find oil. And if we do that, we get this payoff of $800,000. Again, that's sort of what happens if we end up going down that branch. If we don't find oil, then we find it's dry. We'll say find it's dry. And if that's the case, then we don't get any payoff for finding it's dry. We've already paid the $100,000 to drill the well, but if we come up dry, then there's no more cash flow at that point. It's just no new cash. We don't get any we don't get any $800,000 or whatever. Now you'll notice when you spawn an event node, there's 2 other sort of inputs here, and this is the probability. Now, if you create 2 branches, it defaults to give you probabilities of 0.5, 0.5. If you spanned 4 branches from an event node, it would be 0.25, 0.25, 0.25, 0.25. So in our case, we know the probability is 0.25 on the state of nature of finding oil, and we know that it's 0.75 on the state of nature for finding that it's dry. Now I have to sort of there's a little quirk in here which covers up my decision node values, and so now we've got a more complete representation of the tree. Now over here on the right, you'll notice it says $700,000. These values over here on the right, sort of associated with the sort of ends of the tree, they represent sort of the net cash flow if you find yourself making your way all the way to that point in the tree. So if we paid $100,000 and then we got $800,000, then that's why over here you see this positive $700,000. So again, if a combination of decisions and states of nature end up, at this point in the tree, we've got this positive $700,000 payoff. And then correspondingly below that, if we end up at this point in the tree, we've lost $100,000. And for the option of selling it, if we end up on that end of the tree, our resulting payoff is $90,000. Now you'll notice, again, what's happened is the following, is that we have now, the way TreePlan evaluates it is it sort of starts at the end of the tree here, and it goes, okay, we've got a 25% chance of a $700,000 payoff, and we've got a 75% chance of a $100,000 loss. So it automatically calculates the EMV for this sort of uncertain event node, and it moves that value right to here. In other words, it says if in fact we were facing that random draw, then it has an equivalent expected monetary value that we saw from our Bayes calculation of $100,000. And so this decision node right here at the very front of the problem is comparing the EMV at the end of the drill branch to the EMV at the end of the cell branch. So now, again, it's a simple kind of comparison. It's like, well, do I take the $100,000 expected cash flow, or do I take the $90,000 expected cash flow? And in that case, it's a very simple decision which says I should choose branch 1, which is the branch to drill, and realize the expected $100,000 of payoff. Now, let me change a little data on this. Like, for example, suppose a company was offering to buy the land for $105,000. So I'm changing this value of selling the land down here from 90 to 105. When I do that, then you'll notice the decision over here changed. It's like, well, do I drill and realize my expected $100,000, or do I sell and get my expected $105,000? So the decision in the decision indicator in this node says choose the second branch. Okay, so let me go back to our original problem, which is the as we just saw it. So that's the construction of a decision tree. Again, it's very simple. It's actually kind of fun to do once you get the hang of it, and you'll get some practice with this. Now, also for a simple problem, don't hesitate to just sketch it out by hand. The calculations are very simple, and you should certainly understand what's going on under the hood. So that's how we modeled that up. Now the sort of the last thing that we want to cover here is this notion of the sensitivity analysis. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the tree that was generated using RiskSolver and show you how you can use a data table to do sensitivity analysis. Now, you've already seen data tables earlier in the semester. Hopefully this is just a refresher on the technique of doing a data table. But let me show you how that would work. So this is the tree that was constructed with RiskSolver. Again, it looks very much like the one we just generated using TreePlan. The only sort of difference is that you sort of indicate your probabilities, like you would indicate a 0.25 probability as a percent chance, like you would say it's a 25% chance. So we constructed the tree, and then we named some ranges, and so that we can now specify the inputs that then, like for example, the probability of finding oil, we can declare it as 25% right here, and you'll notice now up on the tree we actually are saying it's equal to the named range called probability of oil. So all we've done is basically, we use the add-in to generate the tree, and then we went in and we set it up with named ranges, and we've got the sort of the input parameters laid out right here down at the bottom. Now, there's sort of two outputs that are important in analyzing this tree. One is, what is the decision in this decision node right here, like right here about at cell B9. And what we're doing there is we are basically saying, here's the action if that's indicative of the branch being signaled in this decision node. So if you look, the little formula they have in there is if B9, which is it's either going to take on a value of 1 or 2 depending on whether it's telling you to drill or to sell. It just says if, using the logic statement, if B9 is equal to 1, then put the word drill in. If B9 is equal to 0, or excuse me, is equal to 2, then choose the sell option. So that's sort of how our answers are coming out. And then finally, our expected payoff is from cell A10, and that's our resulting. So let me do what I did earlier, and that is, if I change this, I'll do it right here. If I change the revenue, if I sell it from 90 to 105, then you'll notice the action is going to change from drill to sell, and the expected payoff is now going to be reflective of the best option, which is to sell. So in fact, by just making that change from 90 to 105, it changed both the action, it flipped our decision from drilling to selling, and it also changed our expected payoff. So let me go ahead and set it back the way it was. So this is how we would run a data table on this. And so what we do is we choose some particular, just like we saw before, we choose some sort of input parameter that we're not totally sure about. And in this case, the one that we're sort of most worried about is the probability of oil. So the geologist said, hey, I think it's a 25% chance of there being oil there, but we know that that's at best a guess. And so we want to understand how sensitive our decision is to the imprecision in this geologist's ability to estimate those probabilities. So what we're going to do is the decision table. So a decision table, you really need only what's here in the box. And here's what we have. We have listed the probabilities that we want to evaluate. So it ranges from, we say, look, heck, it could range from 15% to 35%. And we've just done it in little 2% increments. So we're going to evaluate, we want basically evaluate all the trees as if we plug these values in one at a time. 15%, and then is that drill or sell? And if so, what's the expected payoff? You'll notice here in cell N15 is where we are indicating the output, one of the outputs that we're very interested in, and that is we're interested in E24, which is the named range, which is the named range, which is action. So again, this is not a label here. This is actually a little, reference to this output cell, which is the action, and this is a reference cell equal to the expected payoff. So again, all we have at the top here is this is equal to the decision, and this is equal to the expected payoff. So that's how we set our table up, and then to run that data table, all we do is we select it like this. We go to what if analysis, data table, and we're going to specify that we have to specify where we want to plug in these values of 15%, 17%, 19%, etc. And that's where we specify we want the column input cell to be over here, this probability of oil right here. So we want it to be into cell E22, which is, again, also range named as probability of oil. And when we hit OK here, what it's going to do is basically go through and one at a time enter in the particular probability of oil, and then it's going to kind of record what the action and what the expected payoff was. And then it's going to enter in the next probability of oil and record, what it was. So if you look at the output here, it's very interesting. What it says is that if the probability of oil is only 15%, it says the smartest thing to do is to sell the land and realize this $90,000 selling price. As a matter of fact, that's a smart thing to do. That's a smart thing to do all the way up to 23%. In other words, if it's 23%, it's still saying the smart thing to do is don't drill, but to sell the land for $90,000. But once it gets to a certain point, in this case, it's of the values we evaluated, it's 25%. It says at that point, the best decision changes from selling to drilling. And it also now says, here's what's going to be your expected payoff with this associated decision and probability. Now, what's different between, the ones where you're selling, you're only going to get that 90,000. Here, depending on the probability of there being oil there, it really starts to change your expected payoff. So it's telling you two things. One is, yes, you should drill once it gets above a 25% chance. And you can see how much your expected payoff rises if, in fact, your probability of finding oil changes in that respect. So again, this is just a simple way of doing some sensitivity analysis using a data table once you have already constructed a decision tree. So with that again, that allows us to generate this sort of table, and we can draw insights, and we can understand how robust or not robust our given decision situation is, where, as you can see in this case, it's not a very robust decision. The geologist said 25% chance. And what this little analysis here says, man, if he's off even just a little bit, like if the true probability of finding oil is only 23%, then we shouldn't drill. We should, on the other hand, we should sell the land. Now, if these were all, no matter if the probability was 15% or 35%, if they all said you should drill, if that was the best decision, then I would feel a lot better about going forward with the drill option. But now I'm a little worried about it because it's kind of a close call as you get near that 25% probability. So with that, that's our introduction to decision analysis, first part of the chapter. Look forward to seeing you in class. Good luck with everything. Take care.